Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Best of Pedalshift. On this edition, we are going to be revisiting, for the next several months actually, Pedalshift Tour Journals Volume 4, The Transit Tour. On this edition, we're going to be covering the front half of episode 028 of the Pedalshift project. Next month, we'll be doing the ride, and the month following, we'll be doing Pedalshift Project 029, the takeaways for this crazy stunt. Hope you enjoy.
When I moved back east from Portland to Washington, D.C., something caught my eye. I forgot how close everything was in the Northeast. Out on the West Coast, you can go hours between major cities, but on the East Coast, they feel like they practically overlap. And they kind of do. The Bow Wash Corridor is an old term for the nearly constant urban strip that stretches from Boston in the north through New England, New York City, Philadelphia, and down to the nation's capital. It's Amtrak's most important corridor because a train can usually get you from D.C. to New York City centers faster than you can wait out TSA and get from suburban airport to suburban airport and the place that you really want to go to. But it was the transit systems that had my attention. If the outer reaches of each city's transit systems overlapped just enough, couldn't you just take local and regional buses and trains all the way? The answer is yes. And I did it in the summer of 2015. It's neither the fastest, nor the cheapest, nor the most efficient way to do it, and I'm still not sure it was actually fun, or more an experiment in sleep deprivation. But I did it, and the story is told in this tour journal. The transit-aided bicycle tour starts tonight, and it is a 24-hour long transit-aided. Really, it's mostly by transit, so you could argue it's a bicycle-aided transit tour rather than a transit-aided bicycle tour, but, here we are. And it's going from Washington, D.C. to Boston. Here are the arbitrary set of rules. The rules that I have for this. Number one, only forms of transportation that are allowed are bicycle and transit. And the definition of transit is pretty simple. It's basically more what is excluded. And what's excluded are things like Amtrak, Bolt Bus, all the types of things where it's a real city-to-city kind of regional type of a thing, multi-regional type of thing. I want to focus on metropolitan areas and their transit system. So regional commuter transit is included. And quite frankly, I'm going to be relying on that quite a bit. Rail and bus, that is allowed. And I will be taking, I will be definitely using it on this trip. The other rule, and this is very important, it is 1 night of self-supported wild camping is required. So no hotels, no wussing out this time, Mooney. You have to wild camp. And I know there's a hotel nearby that I could conceivably go to, and it's going to be raining, but no. Wild camping is necessary. Plus, frankly, most of the effort in all of this is the creation of the entire sleeping system that I'll be using on this wild camping and kind of reducing the gear all the way down. Frankly, if I was going to be doing this credit card touring style, frankly, there's not a lot of gear that you'd have to carry. It's just basically you and your bike. And that might be something that would be an interesting thing to try some other time. But for this one, I want to have wild camping be a component of it. So those are the rules. It's basically regional rail and bus. Down all the way to county level buses are allowed, although I'm not taking any on this particular route. And 1 night of self-supported wild camping, all required. Route. Now, I've kept this a little bit close to the vest, and one of the reasons was essentially I didn't really know what the final route was going to be until, I would say about a week ago or so. My timing is kind of the most limiting factor here. This is really the only day that I can pull this off with the combination of my schedule, with my girlfriend's schedule, with our dog, with all of these various things in our lives. This was sort of the golden moment to be able to pull this off. It has to happen on a weekday, because the transit schedules get dramatically reduced during the weekends. So as a result, this is it. So route, as completed and pulled off, does manage to get from DC to Boston by transit and bike in 24 hours, actually less than 24 hours, which is actually, it's kind of exciting. So route goes as follows. From my place in DC in the DuPont Circle neighborhood, short bike ride to Union Station. Union Station is this beautiful train station right by Capitol Hill there. You take the MARC. I will take the MARC. You will not do anything. You will probably just listen to a podcast. Maybe you will be paralleling this in some strange way in your mind. I hope so, because I'd like you to join along on the podcast. Anyways, that was a full-on digression. DC to Perryville, Maryland, the northern terminus of the MARC, the Maryland transit system that serves both DC and Baltimore. From there, I will be overnighting nearby. I've got a few spots in mind. I'll talk more about that during Gear Talk. I'll be overnighting, getting a very little amount of sleep because I'm taking the very first train from Newark, Delaware, which is about 20 miles away from Perryville. And I'll be taking that to Philadelphia. Now, that, of course, the 22 miles, give or take, depends on the route I take. That is going to be all done by folding bicycles. So lots of interesting stuff that's going to be part of all of that. And of course, the overnight as well. So the first train out of Newark, Delaware, which is the southern terminus of SEPTA, the Philadelphia Regional Rail System, rail and transit and whatnot. And that gets me into Philadelphia, where I will be transferring to New Jersey Transit, which will take me to Trenton, and Trenton to New York City. A very short bike ride between Pennsylvania Station and Grand Central Station, then Metro North, my old haunt, Metro North, up into Connecticut to Waterbury, Connecticut, and then buses. From then on, it's all buses to Hartford, then to Enfield in northern Connecticut, and then to Springfield, Massachusetts, and then finally a commuter bus from Springfield, Mass, to Boston South Station, where I will be grabbing my Amtrak home. This will all be done in 11 segments, and 2 of them are going to be by bike. That's the Perryville to New York. Actually, well, technically 3 if you count from home to the Union Station in DC. Then, of course, Perryville to Newark. Got to pronounce that correctly. Delawareans, you know how they are about their Newark, Perryville to Newark, and then in New York City. The New York City one's going to be a lot of fun. I think that's going to be a really interesting thing. I've never really biked that much in New York City that much. It's going to be about 20, somewhere between 20, we'll call it 25 miles total out of this entire trip is biking. So really it's a bicycle aided transit trip in a lot of ways. 5 segments of these 11 will be by rail, and that's very front loaded. That's basically the parts from, let me get this right, from DC all the way up to, let's see, that'd be Waterbury, Connecticut. That's going to be all by rail and bike. And then from that point on, it's going to be bike and on bus as well. So those last 4 segments are all going to be by bus. Interesting just how it all end up working out. Mostly has to do with the availability of the rail and how well the rail moves you. In Connecticut, there's it really just sort of dies off outside of the New York City metropolitan area and the New York City, Connecticut suburbs. That's an actual phrase. But in any event, there's not a lot of rail that is connecting from that point there that isn't Amtrak. In fact, if you end up doing a lot of Google searches for transit, they're very quick. Google is very quick to say, oh, by the way, there's Amtrak here. But that is against one of my rules, so I cannot do that. So it's going to be a lot of buses in New England. I want to talk a little bit about the overnight segment. The overnight segment is going to be one of my only real wild camping experiences that I've had. I really wanted to make that a part of this. So let's talk about how Thursday's going to go. The last train out of DC is the train I'll be on towards Perryville, Maryland. And that is, as I mentioned before, the northern terminus of the MARC system. I'll be camping nearby there. I've got a few spots in mind. I've used both Google Maps and Google Earth to kind of come up with sort of my top couple of choices. I do want to minimize the amount of night riding that I have. Now, as it turns out, it's going to be more riding after the sun is down than not, because the first train out of Newark is, I believe, before 6:30 a.m., if I'm not mistaken. I should probably know this because it's kind of a critical thing that I actually make this train, right? But in any event, the point is that there's going to be a lot of sundown type of biking. So my ride is going to be lit up like a Christmas tree, and I'm going to be wearing some very reflective clothing, and I'm going to be staying in places where there are wide bike lanes. There's actually a pretty good bike route between Perryville and Newark, which is really nice. The US 40 route has a well-regarded, I don't know if I'd say well-regarded, well-maintained bicycle route and a very wide shoulder, and that's where I'm going to be on for most of that. Let's see. Stealth camping is going to be in the rain. Basically, the forecast is pretty much rain from the moment I leave until the moment I get up in the morning to go to Newark. So that's going to be a very major part of what I'll be talking about in Gear Talk, which is how the heck am I going to make a shelter that is going to be somewhat viable and will keep me dry through the night and allow me to get at least a few hours of sleep. We'll talk about that in Gear Talk. So that's going to be the overnight portion. Not a lot of hours involved, a little bit of riding, a little bit of overnight, but the most important part, of course, is going to be how well can I get a shelter set up in the dark in a spot that is probably legal. Most of these places look like that they are legal or at least not illegal. And of course, we all know that there's a distinction between illegal and not illegal. So we'll be going with that for the overnight. Friday morning, it's very likely my morning is going to be very early, probably in the 4:00 hour. Luckily, the great part about camping operation that I've got is that it's going to be so minimal that it's going to be basically untie the tarp, bring down the hammock, stuff it all into the waterproof stuff sack, and get rolling. It probably will only take me a few minutes. And once I get going, it's probably going to be anywhere between an hour and a half or an hour and a half, depending on where I end up camping on the Thursday night portion. And it's really basically a sprint. It's a sprint all day Friday to Boston. And the key to making this work is maximizing the commuter nature of transit systems. And the commuter nature is basically things tend to flow into cities during the inbound commuter rush, and then they tend to flow out of the cities on the outbound in the evenings. That is sort of a big file under duh, right? Well, the nature of all of this is sort of like catching a wave while you're surfing. The beauty of the New York City transit system is that it's sort of operating in both directions all the time. It's just how New York operates. But Philadelphia is not so much like that. And the outbound in New York, well, it kind of shuts down as well. So the key here is to catch the wave from northbound into Philadelphia, grabbing sort of the southern part of the New York City system and moving up, and then grabbing that last wave out from New York City, and then grabbing all those Connecticut and Massachusetts buses as they start to deliver people home towards various parts of New England. And as it turns out, it works. It works pretty well. And it's going to be kind of fun to see how this all ends up working out. I'll say that the most helpful aspect of all of this is going to be the bicycle. Even though it's not going to be something that I'm going to be on a lot, it is critical in a couple of places. Number one, of course, is linking up the DC system with the Philadelphia system. And it's kind of interesting how close that really is. It's about a 20-mile linkage. And what's fascinating and what I want to bookmark in my mind for later is what other systems are linked up by distances that are like that are reasonably bikeable distances, because I think that's going to be something to think about for later on and for other types of tours as well. So that's one area where the bike is really critical. The other one is going to be in New York City, of course, and that is, it's more a convenience issue. There are ways that I could hop on a variety of different types of transit that could get me between Penn Station and Grand Central, but I think biking is going to be a lot better, a lot more efficient, and a lot more fun. So that's where the bike is going to be helpful as well. Other than that, frankly, the bike's going to be a bit of an anchor in a lot of ways. Like I said, this is more of a bicycle-aided transit tour, but because it's so critical for these other parts, well, you know what? It's got to come along with me. So that's how we're going to be doing it. Tice transfer point is going to be about 13 minutes, and that's in Enfield, Connecticut, which is up in the northern part of the state towards the border with Massachusetts. And missing that could really suck. But the good news is that the transfer is designed by the two systems. It's the Connecticut system and then the Springfield, Massachusetts bus system. They're designed to meet there. So barring utter catastrophe on either side of those things, these buses should meet up pretty well. One thing that's kind of interesting about that is, as I get north of Hartford, really, it's sort of, I don't want to say point of no return, but I do have to say that the likelihood of this working and me being able to get home as planned really is going to rely on me kind of fulfilling and meeting all of these things, because the opportunities to catch the train that I'm scheduled to catch in alternate cities really goes downhill once I start going north, because it's cutting off and away from where the rail systems are. And frankly, if I miss certain buses, well, the opportunities to turn around and go back are kind of limited. So a little bit of an all or nothing thing once we get to that point. A little bit of drama. We'll see how it goes. Great part about it is that once I arrive in Boston, I've got about an hour and a half, and that'll be nice because after a long day of travel, it'll be nice to have a little bit of time to maybe grab a bite to eat before I hop on the Amtrak, and I'm going to sleep the sleep of champions on that train. I arrive back in DC about 6:30 in the morning on Saturday. So when all is said and done, grab the first train out of DC at 9 p.m. I grab my Amtrak return at 9:30 p.m. This whole thing is going to be done really in under 24 hours. I've got that little bit of layover there in Boston that touches it up before my turnaround point is a little bit after 24 hours. But in any event, it's kind of interesting. And it's trust me, I understand this is a wacky stunt. And I think that that sort of gets me to the next thing. Why the hell am I doing this? Why? Well, I think it goes back to the old adage that mountain climbers often say, because it's there. I think we've heard that a million times. It also is sort of a shout out to the old style of adventuring back in the day, back in the Annie Londonderry day. And we talked about this on the past podcast when we sort of celebrated her trip around the world by bicycle or with bicycle, that, sometimes you create these challenges because you want to challenge yourself. And I'm interested in making the challenge based on mode limitations rather than distance. And, I've done it by distance so many times, that I think, these rules are just interesting to me at least, and they test different things. I like the fact also that there's a wild camping element. I like the fact that there's the folding bike element. I like the fact that I am able to limit my gear. I think that's going to be a really important thing. I think I've noticed most of all that by limiting my gear, I'm starting to learn that my gear setup is really kind of bloated when all is said and done. And there's going to be opportunities with my kind of full bike set to find some savings there in terms of the gear that I carry. It's really interesting. It's sort of the old minimalism approach where you realize you have too much stuff in your house, stuff that you don't use, stuff that is there sort of more just in case, but the just in case doesn't really happen all that often. I think I'm going to find that to be the case with this system here. So we'll see how that all goes. Lessons from all of this, I think, are going to go beyond just sort of the gear elements. I think it's going to be just how the folding bike plus transit works in terms of an overall bike tour. Sort of looking at some potential ideas for 2016. And I don't think I've got a 6-week tour in me for next year. I was interested and am interested in doing something around the 40th anniversary of the bike centennial. I think that that's something that just sort of makes some sense. So I would love to do some kind of a cross-country tour, but I might not have the time to do it in 2016. Well, the lessons that I learned from this might help me when I have a folding bike and I have X amount of time and I want to do full across country or a large regional chunk of it. These fast forwards can help me get to the point where I bike in the places I want to bike at, and I fast forward through the places that they may be nice, but they're not on my list to explore and entertain. So I think that will be all great. And frankly, this is all hashtag not cheating as far as I'm concerned, because it's my ride. And I think that that is the most important part of it. It's actually not the most important part of it. What's the most important part is all of you. I would like you to learn something from all of this, and I'd like you to follow along. So we've got Pedalshift Tour Journals, Volume 4, that is available, and it is, I've already got the pre-tour discussion that is up there right now. So if you are already a listener, if you are a subscriber to it, you have already got that in your feed. I'd invite all of you to go to pedalshift.net and take a look at it if you're not. And one thing that I'll say is that once these come down, they go down forever, at least for now. And so if you missed out on volumes 3, well, it's gone. Volume 2, gone. So I invite you to follow along. And it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun. I'm sort of getting the hang of this whole podcasting while riding thing. I think it works out pretty well. So go check it out. Link in the show notes, of course, to Pedalshift Tour Journals, Volume 4. I'll probably be doing about 2 to 5 minutes every transit link. I was going to say every day, but that's not really how this tour works. This is a 24-hour tour. This one's a little bit different. We'll see how this all goes. I'm excited to have you along for the ride. Of course, also follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook as well. Don't know how the images are going to be. This is going to be maybe a lot of shots of the insides of buses. Who the heck knows? We'll see. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net. Lots of great content. You can hear the Pedalshift Project through iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his debut album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Habitat, wherever cool music is available.